Our next presenter is Charlotte Bailey.
Good morning, my name is Charlotte Bailey and my thesis is on a comprehensive case for the death penalty beyond retribution. What is the balance of punishment and justice? This is certainly not a new question, as it has been debated since the days of the Old Testament. What type of punishment pushes the limit too far, violating human rights and God's law? The death penalty has been and continues to be heatedly debated since the late 1700s when the first abolitionist movements formed in America. The American people were reinterpreting the Eighth Amendment and what should be considered cruel and unusual. The Enlightenment period encouraged people to seek the most humane ways to punish criminals and give those who had violated the law a second chance. Could this be a moral development in society as a whole, or is the death penalty meant to be left in the Dark Ages? Capital punishment is needed to protect everyday citizens and keep murderers from committing further atrocities. In the United States of America, capital punishment has a dark and rough history used to refute the need for such a lasting consequence. However, the reforms made only support its validity. Society has changed drastically since capital punishment was first instituted in the United States. It was rife with racism, which penetrated every institution in the country, including, but not only, its justice system. However, as decades have passed, society has changed. The misuse of the death penalty does not invalidate its place in the justice system. Rather, it requires greater care in its application. Some crimes cannot be satisfied with a penalty other than death. One of the most notorious serial killers from Texas was a man named Kenneth McDuff. He murdered 9 known people, but was suspected of murdering 14 in total. While he was on parole from a burglary charge, he decided to murder his first victims. Hanging out in a schoolyard were 3 teenagers, Marcus Dunham, Louise Sullivan, and Robert Brand. He forced the 3 of them into his trunk and took them to a concealed location. There, he shot the 2 boys in the head at close range before he raped, tortured, and suffocated the girl. He was caught and sentenced to death, but barely escaped his sentence 3 different times before the Supreme Court succumbed to abolitionists and removed capital punishment in 1972. Instead of the death penalty, he was commuted to a life sentence, yet only served 23 years. During those decades, he received extensive therapy and convinced the parole board he was remorseful for his actions. This, combined with his good behavior, made him seem truly rehabilitated. However, a year after his release, he resumed his sadistic killing. His next victim was a woman named Brenda Thompson. She was seen being held hostage in McDuff's car, which police saw with their own eyes, but they lost him in a car chase. He tortured Brenda to death, and her body was not found for 7 years. His last known victim was a woman named Melissa Northrup, a pregnant woman who already had 2 children. He strangled her and dumped her body into a gravel quarry. In 1992, McDuff was found guilty and finally received the lethal injection in 1998. This deranged serial killer murdered innocent people and is an example of why capital punishment is needed. Not everyone can be rehabilitated because not everyone wants to be rehabilitated. Kenneth McDuff should serve as a reminder that some offenders are truly evil and enjoy the pain and suffering they inflict on their victims. This invokes a need for a thoughtful and deliberate solution for people who cannot be allowed to re-enter society. The death penalty should not be abolished from the United States. Those against capital punishment say it is cruel and unusual, does not allow rehabilitation, and is not justified under any circumstances. However, Paul Castle, the former district judge of Utah and author of Debating the Death Penalty, has disputed this theory. The most despicable crimes are against children. They are innocent and vulnerable, not yet understanding how the world works, and evildoers are known to take advantage of this. Arthur Shawcross was a serial killer who murdered 13 people. He was known as the Genesee River Killer because once he had brutalized and murdered his victims, he would toss their bodies into the Genesee River. He began his killing spree with 2 children, 10-year-old Jack Blake and 8-year-old Karen Hill. he raped and strangled both of them before he carelessly dumped their bodies into the river. Shawcross was caught and received a sentence of 25 years to life in prison. He was released after only 15 years. Was raping and murdering 2 children not enough to prove he should not be let out into society again? His parole officer described him as possibly the most dangerous individual to have been released to this community in many years. Upon release, Shawcross changed victim type, which is not unusual for serial killers. He began targeting women. His new name became the Rochester Strangler. He murdered 11 women by raping, torturing, and then strangling them. One of the women was June Stott. She was Shawcross's friend, and one day he invited her to the beach. Stott accepted, not knowing the danger that surrounded her. Shawcross strangled her, mutilated her body after death, then cannibalized her. The specifics of the way he slaughtered Miss Stott is too horrific to describe. Shawcross was then sentenced to 250 years in prison. Serial killers are rarely, if ever, reformed. When Shawcross willfully stole the lives of 2 innocent children, he should have received the death penalty. Instead, he was released, murdering almost a dozen women. When will people realize reform is not possible for everyone, and that the worst crimes are so heinous, only death can satisfy justice's needs? Lady Justice, holding her scales, knows when mercy is misplaced, and when the only true balance is found in the finality of death for those who have stolen so many lives. A civilized society believes all individuals must be held responsible for their actions and suffer all necessary consequences. However, some crimes are too cruel for people to be given a second chance. A sadistic serial killer who holds no regard for human life must be kept away from the public. Proving capital punishment is necessary for the most evil criminals. Protecting the weak from the strong is a foundational aspect of civilization. An ancient ruler of the old Babylonian Empire, Hammurabi, created a set of laws that is considered one of the oldest in history. It is called Hammurabi's Code, dated to 1755 to 1750 BC. It states that one of Hammurabi's goals was to make justice visible in the land, to destroy the wicked person and the evildoer, that the strong might not injure the weak. Protecting citizens' basic rights is essential for peace, and this is done through the punishment of those who violate laws. John Locke, one of our world's most influential philosophers, maintains that these punishments must be, in his words, effective. It should comply with natural law principles about the amount of punishment. Locke believed that the government should impose the death penalty only when necessary to keep order and justice. Protecting citizens' basic rights is essential for peace, and this is done through the punishment of those who violate laws. Society's right to capital punishment is based on its collective need for self-defense. It is a key tenet in U.S. law that killing someone in self-defense is justified. The same logic can be transferred onto a larger scale. To keep the citizens of an entire country safe, it is logically and morally correct to utilize deadly force. Without the deterrence and accountability the death penalty provides, society devolves into the strong overpowering the weak. As author Paul Castle argued, if human life is to be held in awe, then the law forbidding the taking of it must be held in awe. And the only way it can be made awful or awe-inspiring is to entitle it to inflict the penalty of death. Capital punishment is unique in its finality, never allowing the offender a chance of parole. It crushes any opportunity of the murderer preying on more innocents. The death penalty serves as the most effective way to preserve society and uphold the duty of the government to protect its citizens' natural rights in cases of aggravated murder. Murderers who kill in depraved and sadistic ways are much more likely to commit more lethal crimes after their first kill. A study using 9 negative binomial and logistic regression models found that prior first-degree murder convictions were significantly associated with current/instant homicide offending and multiple homicide offending, despite controls for 5 forms of serious felony violence, age, and race. It was found that perpetrators of current homicides have twice the chance of having prior homicide charges compared to the population at large. First-degree murderers are more likely to commit violent crimes since they have already committed the greatest crime of all, murder. As the level of violence in a crime increases, the likelihood of first-degree murder convictions increases. They present a higher risk of not only killing again, but killing multiple victims. Once they are in the cycle of murder, they cannot be persuaded to stop. If released, they will immediately resume from where they stopped. There are multiple examples of this happening. Kenneth McDuff, Peter Woodcock, Richard Bigenwald, and Arthur Shawcross. Once they were released from prison, McDuff killed 6 more, Woodcock killed 1 more, Bigenwald killed 5 more, and Shawcross killed 11 more. The justice system has proven itself incapable of keeping murderers in prison once they are given a life sentence. Multiple parole opportunities and appeals often arise. Who would feel safe knowing that they are walking past a murderer on parole, or living next to one, or working with one? In theory, people want murderers to have a chance at rehabilitation, but in practical application, no one wants to risk his or her safety or the safety of loved ones. How do psychiatrists know when murderers are safe to be let out on parole? The answer is they do not. A former FBI profiler, John Douglas, said, "The mental health professionals start with the personality and infer the behavior from that perspective. My people and I start with the behavior and infer the personality from that perspective." Mental health professionals overlook a criminal's past actions and instead focus solely on current behavior in order to assess danger, failing to recognize insidious manipulation techniques. Criminals who have a chance of parole often join Bible studies and pretend to demonstrate rehabilitation to their psychiatrist in order to show that they are on the right path to reform. These types of criminals, psychopaths and sociopaths, are master manipulators, as shown through their previous crimes of luring a victim, killing them, and hiding the evidence. These are not ordinary people who can be rehabilitated even after years of therapy apiece. Richard Bigenwald and Peter Woodcock are examples of this, having been subjected to more than a decade of therapy. Once citizens grasp this, they will not want to release these criminals to the public anymore. What is the purpose of a life sentence with no possibility of parole? The endless decades endured, and the hardest and most monotonous toil, debarred from all pleasant sights and sounds, and cut off from all earthly hope. Can a life sentence truly be seen as a more ethical solution than a quick death? The prison system has many issues that include crowded living, lack of privacy, increased risk of victimization, and exposure to punitive segregation that lead to emerging and worsening psychiatric symptoms. Punitive segregation, also known as solitary confinement, is detrimental to one's mental health. When a criminal is exceptionally violent and cannot be housed with others, he is confined to a small cell where he is entirely alone, with his only human interaction occurring when his food is delivered. It is a bleak and solitary existence. This punishment serves no real rehabilitative purpose and only worsens a criminal's mental and physical condition. Felons even have rejected life without parole when they are on death row, an example being Danny Edwards. Edwards refused to accept a favor from former Illinois Governor George Ryan and requested that Ryan not commute his death sentence. Prosecutors have successfully argued that life without parole is a fate worse than death. Rehabilitation is among one of the most important goals of the justice system. Knowing that a criminal cannot possibly be reformed and housing him like a caged animal for the rest of his life is not justice or mercy. If anything, life without parole is more inhumane than a swift death. Holding a vicious murderer accountable for his evil actions by ending his life serves prompt justice. He no longer suffers and cannot cause harm to anyone else. The punishment must have a balance of humane considerations and justice, and the death penalty provides this. The death penalty is morally permissible. Society has a right to protect itself and to take the lives of those who have shown utter contempt for the lives of others. Consequences are essential for the moral order of society and to remind people that crimes do not go unpunished. The definition of murder is the unlawful, premeditated killing of one human being by another. The murderer kills the innocent, while the justice system kills the guilty. Everyone's God-given natural rights include life, liberty, and property. If someone commits the crime of a home invasion, then he can be sued and put in jail. Since he violated another person's right to liberty and property, then his liberty and property can be taken. Whoever cravenly infringes on another person's right to life has brought his own right to live into question. Killing a guilty man after application of due process is not murder. Capital punishment is not based on retribution. Rather, it is about restoring justice. The death penalty has to be administered by the state and is not influenced by personal connections and feelings. As mentioned previously, reformation of a criminal is one of the most important goals of the justice system, yet some people cannot and choose not to change. Plato speaks on this by maintaining that the primary penal purpose is reform, to cure offenders, as he says. For crimes that show offenders are incurable, Plato argues that execution is justifiable. God wants everyone to repent of his sins, but this does not remove the obligation of bearing the consequences. For it is said in Genesis 9:6, "Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image." God created man to reflect his likeness, but to kill a person was tantamount to killing God in effigy. This law was given to Noah directly after the flood. A common mistranslation of the Bible is of the commandment, "Thou shalt not murder." In some translations of the Bible, such as the King James Version, it says, "Thou shalt not kill," but that is wrong. In the original Hebrew language of the Old Testament, the word used in the sixth commandment is ratzah, which translates to murder, not kill. God can provide grace, but society holds men accountable. The death penalty has existed since the time of Noah in the book of Genesis. After the flood, God gave a list of commandments to Noah that included shedding a murderer's blood to signify that human life is sacred. God knew that this rule was essential for the development of humankind because human beings must be held responsible for their evil actions. Evil must not be treated like a disease that can be cured in the criminal, but as a conscious action made by an intelligent creature. The death penalty has only come into question in the 20th century and has been abolished by many Western countries. Should the United States of America abolish the death penalty along with its allies? Among the West, Italy and Germany were the first countries to abolish the death penalty. Their judicial histories were filled with corruption, where defendants were presumed guilty. The European Union now requires any country who wants to join to abolish capital punishment. Yet this does not mean America should rid itself of an ancient rule that has existed since the beginning of mankind. Americans have Fifth and Sixth Amendment rights that guarantee a right to a fair trial and due process, forming the principle that defendants are innocent until proven guilty. Despite the concerns, the death penalty is not a violation of a person's rights. It is simply the penalty imposed once application of due process has been completed. The notion that many innocent people have been executed is false. No confirmed case of an innocent person being executed has ever been confirmed, only speculated. Only speculations can be made that the justice system has likely executed an innocent person. Yet this does not require the abolition of the death penalty. On average, 43,000 people die in car crashes each year. Cars are not banned as a result. Instead, reforms are made to traffic laws and safety modifications are added to cars. If the same reasoning used to eliminate the death penalty is applied to other laws, one could conclude that there should be no laws at all due to the potential for misuse. Ultimately, there are no systems without their flaws, and laws should be reformed instead of abolished. It is impossible to say that the death penalty does not deter serial killers at all, since most people do fear death. Deterrence is difficult to measure with its many variables, but the proof of deterrence is not what justifies capital punishment. If the proof of deterrence was required for all punishments, then we would have to release many types of criminals. It is common sense to infer that the threat of death dissuades a person from the thought of murder. Judge Hyman Barchet of New York puts it best. The death penalty is a warning, just like a lighthouse throwing its beams out to sea. We hear about shipwrecks, but we do not hear about the ships the lighthouse guides safely on their way. We do not have proof of the number of ships it saves, but we do not tear the lighthouse down. This rationale supports a study that was done on murder rates before the ban placed on the death penalty versus murder rates after it was reinstated in 1988. It was found that murder rates decreased significantly in the states where the death penalty was reinstated and enforced. The deterrence effect is unquantifiable, but it still influences the decisions of criminals in observable ways. Famous philosophers such as Cesare Beccaria and Albert Camus have argued that there is not a morally and ethically correct way to end someone's life. However, self-defense and killing in war is justified. Many believe that any form of execution is inhumane, for the state and the individual can never have a cause to kill. Strangely, euthanasia is considered a moral and ethical way to end someone's life in several countries. Euthanasia is a procedure where a patient who is considered incurable from either a mental or physical condition is given a combination of drugs that kills them painlessly. Ironically, the countries who have legalized euthanasia have also abolished the death penalty. If the countries who outlaw capital punishment have found a justifiable way to end someone's life in medical situations, consistent application of logic suggests that the execution of certain murderers addresses an incurable disease in society. The United States of America has had a difficult time finding the correct blend of drugs for its lethal injection, yet the countries who perform euthanasia have had no issues. The problem is not that a combination of medicines that painlessly kill someone does not exist. It is that companies do not want to be associated with the execution of murderers. To solve this issue, the names of the companies supplying the drugs should be kept secret. Once America has a stable lethal injection that does not torture its prisoners, their execution will be considered humane. Capital punishment goes beyond retribution. It is a necessary tool for justice. The sacredness of human life must be upheld, and the safety of innocence comes first, especially when some criminals show no remorse for their crimes and are beyond rehabilitation. For these types of criminals, execution is the only option to protect not only citizens, but their own dignity. No human-made system is without flaws, but the historical, moral, and practical arguments emphasize the death penalty's rightful place in society to ensure balance. Without rule of law, predators roam society and prey on the weak. Law by itself is not sufficient. Deterrence and enforcement is needed, and the death penalty provides both. Just as David was justified in killing Goliath to protect Israel, the United States must protect its people from the threat posed by vicious murderers. Serving justice rather than vengeance, the death penalty is meant to restore order and protect civilization's foundational values. Thank you. The floor is open for questioning.
I have a question.
Yes.
There are significant amount of murders that happen in this country. What is the criteria for who gets on the death penalty, or gets it, or do you feel like everybody who kills should be eligible for the death
Right.
penalty?
So the people who are eligible for the death penalty, they have to commit an aggravated murder crime. An aggravated murder includes another crime along with first-degree murder. So that would be something like raping and then murdering someone, stealing something and then murdering someone, torturing them and then murdering someone. So it's another crime along with first-degree murder. I don't believe that all murderers should immediately get the death penalty. It's only when they devalue human life. Thank you. Yes.
So why do you think serial killers start to kill, and why do you think they don't stop after one kill?
I think based on my research and a few books I've read, they start to kill because of prior trauma. So in their childhood, they go through some very difficult things, and that is usually paired with a few mental disabilities. They're usually psychotic, they're a sociopath, a psychopath, and their brain chemistry, along with their environment, causes them to start killing. And the reason they can't stop is because I've read that once you murder someone, it really does change your brain chemistry, and you just can't seem to stop. And that's been seen with many different serial killers, such as Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Oh, yes.
Did you find in your research any evidence where regeneration, spiritual regeneration, had any impact on murderers in general or serial killers specifically?
Spiritual. My paper didn't necessarily cover that. I believe that serial killers can come to God and they can repent for their crimes, but that does not remove the obligation they need to bear the consequences for the crimes they've committed against civilization. But they can correct themselves, like between just them and God, absolutely. Yes.
When you were doing your research about their reformation, what was the psychiatric help that they received?
So, criminals, serial killers specifically, they often are given therapists to try and figure out like why they murdered someone, and if they could maybe stop, and to just like figure out their motive for other research. They honestly, besides that, they don't have very much help to like help rehabilitate them, because when they are placed on death row, they don't necessarily get a lot of help, such as like criminals who have a chance of being released and going back out into society. Yes.
How can we reconcile the death penalty as Christians, considering that, judging by the fruit that they are bearing, they probably do not know God or have a relationship with Him, and will most likely go to hell if they die. But if they have life with parole, they have at least a chance to know who God is. But even if they still have to bear the consequences of that in, the world we have right now, they can still pass on and be reconciled with God as is His will.
I believe it is not the justice system's duty to hypothetically guess if they will repent and be made right with God. I believe that God's mercy can send them to heaven, of course, and they can reconcile themselves with God. And God knows what's in their hearts. We can never know what is in their heart truly. And so I believe that as a society, that is not our issue necessarily, and that it is just our job to punish them for the crimes they have committed against humanity and to hold them accountable. Yes?
I have a question. What is the criteria that you would use to know that somebody or a criminal is not reformable or redeemable?
Right, so when a criminal is not reformable, according to the justice system, like I mentioned earlier, it's when they devalue human life. It's when they torture someone, then murder them. It's when they rape someone, then murder them. It's when they just hold no regard for the sanctity of human life. And that is when I believe, and the justice system believes, they are beyond reform. Yes?
Another amazing job. Why do you think that in our society we seem to care more about the care of victimizers rather than the care of victims and future victims?
I believe that in the United States, we are special and different from other countries in the fact that we focus on the rights of the individual. We focus so heavily on that we care about the comfort of these murderers, which is actually kind of interesting. And I think that's why, because other countries who have the death penalty, such as Japan. They do not care about the well-being of murderers. They just execute them without even telling them when they're going to be executed. They don't try and give them a painless death such as we do. And so I just believe it's because in Western society, in the United States, we care about the individual no matter who they are and the types of crimes they've committed. Yes?
Did you delve into the lack of a developed prefrontal cortex, anatomically speaking, in your research, as those that are more prone to serial killings and whatnot?
I believe that there are people who are more prone, I guess, to violence because people are born with mental deficiencies, and that can affect how they are. But I've read that even though they may be a psychopath, a sociopath, they may not have a true understanding of emotion. They are still in control of their actions, and they still understand everything that they're doing. Now, people who are in a psychosis when they murder someone and don't realize what they're doing, that's something else entirely. They should not be given the death penalty. But when people know what they're doing, I believe they should be held responsible. Yes?
So I actually worked with a man named Courtney Contrell, and so whenever I left that business, a couple months later, I saw the news that he had killed someone in New Orleans, and he was addicted to cocaine, which makes you violent, aggressive, and fearful about things. I was just wondering, would you advocate for the death penalty there, or would you advocate for him do his time in prison and come clean from drugs and be reinstated in society?
My research didn't cover murderers under the influence of drugs, but in my personal opinion, I believe that if he willingly took the drugs and then murdered someone, he still knew what he was doing and he should still be held responsible. And if it is aggravated murder, then he should be eligible for the death penalty.
Okay, Charlotte, you say at the end of your paper, the death penalty is humane, effective, and moral. The justice system should continually be improving its procedures and reforming laws to prevent mistakes and increase effectiveness. However, this applies to all systems, meaning the death penalty is not an exception. You've done a great job presenting your case. Very good, Charlotte. Thank you.